Hi guys, this is going to be our review for evolution chapters 14 through 16. I've kind of selected different parts out of each chapter to make sure that you focus on those when you're studying. So chapter 14, what is the difference between spontaneous generation and biogenesis? So just as a reminder, spontaneous generation is saying that living things can come from non-living things, and then biogenesis states that living things must come from other living things. So which is the correct way to describe the continuation of life on Earth would be biogenesis. You can look back over the scientists who determined this and actually gave data for this so that they could convince people that this was true. To describe characteristics of the first living cells on Earth. So our characteristics of living cells were that they were prokaryotic. They resemble current archaea bacteria, and they would have been anaerobic and heterotrophic. So make sure you have that. Anaerobic and heterotrophic. The theory for how scientists believe the first eukaryotes formed is endosymbiosis, where small aerobic prokaryotes began to live inside a larger anaerobic prokaryote, which would lead to the future of mitochondria and chloroplasts. So you can look back at that. That's in our notes packet if you're using that, at the fossil record beginning timeline, and you can look there at prokaryotes and then rise of photosynthesis and then eukaryotes. Two possible sources for simple organic compounds on Earth. If you take a look at Oparin's theory, that would be a good place to start. So in Oparin's theory, he believed that the early atmosphere contained specific chemicals that when they reached high temperatures, the gases could have formed simple organic compounds. Basically, when the Earth cooled, those organic compounds could have cooled into liquid water, and then other situations like lightning and UV radiation would provide enough energy that would allow them to be the macromolecules that are essential to life. Other possibilities could be something like organic compounds were on meteors, and when they ended up here, like when they hit the Earth, then they landed in water and were able to then be somewhere where they could actually thrive, potentially producing life, but that's not the part we're talking about here. All right, in 15, define evolution. Evolution is just change over time, and that's a big key here to understand that evolution is really just looking at those micro changes or microevolution and taking the genetic aspect into effect. So looking at the genes that are available and the options that are available that then allow for evolution to occur or change over time to occur. Explain the difference between catastrophism and uniformitarianism. So catastrophism was Cuvier, and he basically said that there were large geologic catastrophes that caused mass extinctions, which then would lead to evolution. Lyell was under the impression of uniformitarianism, which just said that the processes that shaped the Earth in the past shape the Earth today, still today. So it's just a continual process of the same thing. Number 3, explain the difference between Lamarck's idea of inheritance of acquired characteristics and Darwin's idea of natural selection. So acquired characteristics was Lamarck's main viewpoint, and he said that organisms acquire their traits because of the experience or behavior of their parents, and so the traits were actually given to the children because of whatever the parents did to acquire them themselves. Darwin instead looked at evolution through natural selection and said that organisms who are best fit for the environment or best suited to the environment will reproduce more successfully than other organisms, thereby passing on their genes to the next generation. You can use the giraffe example that we did in class if you'd like, just to kind of give yourself a reference for how that works and how those compare. Next we have define natural selection and survival of the fittest and provide an example. So again, you can use the giraffe example for this. Survival of the fittest is saying that if you're more fit, then you reproduce more often, and so you pass your genes on more often, which then allows for the species to continue and those genes to continue in that population. So examples you could use, we did the bunny simulation. You could use that as an example if you needed to, but just kind of look through some examples that we talked about in class as well, as many of your multiple choice questions use scenarios for you to be able to pick the right term. Okay, next, this is still from chapter 15. Define adaptive advantage and explain how this helps an organism survive. So adaptive advantage is having an adaptation that allows you as an individual of a species to have a greater chance of survival. In class we use the example of the owl having different characteristics that are adaptations from other birds and other similar species that allow them to survive in the way that they do. Okay, 2, what is the difference between homologous and analogous structures? How do they work as an evidence of evolution? So analogous structures are body parts that are similar in function due to environmental pressures, but they don't look the same, like they didn't come from the same family. They look similar, they have similar functions, but they didn't come from the same evolutionary tree or evolutionary family. So with analogous structures, an example could be the wings of a fly compared to the wings of a bird. They developed independently of each other, but they do the same function. Homologous structures are structures that are the same internal structures, same anatomy, but they do different things. They have a different function. So a good example is the arm of a human, and we compared that to the leg of a horse as an example. Okay, number 3, what is a vestigial structure? So a vestigial structure is a part that has little or no function in the current organism, but it had a function in a previous past ancestor. So an example could be the tailbone of a human. Number 4, what is the point of using molecular biology as an evidence of evolution? In this one, what they'll do is take DNA sequences and look at those, compare them to other organisms, and if you are more closely related to another organism, you have more similarities of your DNA. Okay, and one more for chapter 15, convergent evolution, divergent evolution, and coevolution. So in coevolution, there's 2 or more species that evolve together. The best example, I think, is antibiotics and bacteria. So the bacteria that are living through an antibiotic treatment are the ones that have adapted or have a better gene pool that are able to survive, and so then the antibiotic can no longer kill that particular bacteria. Convergent evolution is when they appear similar, but they're not closely related at all, and you can use analogous structures for this as an example. So an example is dolphin and a shark. They look similar, but they didn't come from the same family. They just converged. They came from different families, but they converged to look more alike over time. And then divergent evolution is when you have a species or an individual of a species that, I shouldn't say individual of a species, but a species who becomes more and more different from each other due to different habitats. So eventually they become 2 separate species. Okay, chapter 16. 3 ways variation occurs in a population: mutations, recombination like crossing over, and then random pairing of gametes, which is just the random pairing of sex cells, egg and sperm cells. Okay, define gene pool, allele frequency, and phenotype frequency. So gene pool is all of the genes that are available for that particular population. Allele frequency is how many of each allele are present in that population. So like big A compared to little a. And then phenotype frequency is how many individuals have a particular physical characteristic or phenotype within that population. And just looking like we did this with the bunny lab, brown fur versus white fur. Okay, Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is a hypothetical situation for a population when it would say that there's no evolution occurring. So what are the 5 criteria that must occur for a population to remain stable? They are no net mutations, no one enters or leaves the population, they have to have a large population, individuals mate randomly, and natural selection cannot occur. So this again, it's a hypothetical ideal situation where evolution would not occur. Okay, number 4, define gene flow compared to genetic drift. So gene flow is when genes move into or out of a population, meaning that the gene pool changes because some individuals leave or enter the population. And genetic drift, allele frequencies, remember big A versus little a, in a population change. Generally this happens because the population is small, so you might see big A being more suited to the environment compared to little a, or maybe because the population is small, our allele frequencies have diminished, and so we don't have a whole lot of choice in that population. All right, more for chapter 16, the difference between the three types of natural selection: stabilizing, disruptive, and directional. So stabilizing would be a normal bell curve. Individuals with the average form of a trait have the highest fitness. Disruptive is when we see two peaks instead of a bell curve. We have two peaks. The individuals with either extreme have the trait have the best chance for survival. And then directional, one of the extreme forms of the trait has the best chance of survival. Two factors that determine if an organism is from a new species: we use morphology and biology. So morphology is the internal and external appearance of the organism, and then we also use biology, which is based on who can reproduce successfully. Okay, geographic isolation and reproductive isolation. So geographic isolation is when species get separated, physically separated. We talked about maybe like a river or maybe a road, a highway gets built, and so a species gets separated, and eventually they become different enough from each other that they develop into two different species. And then reproductive isolation, basically they become genetically isolated over time. This could be because of different mating times, different food sources, different habitats that would cause that. And then two theories on the rates of speciation. Gradualism says that species develop at regular intervals or regular gradual rate. And then punctuated equilibrium says that there's a sudden change in like the environment or a situation that causes a whole bunch of new species to develop all at once. And then there's no change for a long period of time, and then another big event happens that causes a whole bunch of new species to develop. And that's it. Good luck studying.